Hi everyone, and welcome to our third Word Study Wednesday. We are in week 3 and we are getting into actually how to implement word study exercises in our classroom. So I'm excited for this week and our final week next week to talk about different word sorting activities and what they'll look like in your classroom and different ways to kind of adapt things to your students' needs. So this week I'm going to talk about the kinds of word sorts that there are and different kinds of routines that you can adapt. And I've just put up a list of videos and websites on the blog, and at the bottom of the website you'll see that I typed in a list of examples of weekly routines. They're really neat to look at because the routine is kind of whatever you make it for the classroom. It needs to fit the needs of your students, so you won't really know exactly perfectly what you want to do until you meet your students and you test them and you get to know them and see how they learn and how they function best in the classroom. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'd like to start off with just a basic overview of the different kinds of sorts that there are, because a lot of people, and even me when I first started doing word sorts, I would get a page with a word sort on it and I go, okay, well, I'll give it to the students, I'll talk about the pattern, they're going to cut it out, they're going to glue it, we'll talk about it, and we're done all in one day. But there's really so much more that you can do with word sorts. You wouldn't even believe it. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the different kinds of word sorts today. So there are 3 layers of English orthography, or our English language, and there are sorts to match each layer, and they really develop as students develop. They get a little bit more complex. So first off, you're going to start with the alphabet sorts, because English orthography has the layers of alphabet, pattern, and meaning. So the younger students are going to work on alphabet sorts, which are basically your word pattern sorts. The students are going to look at comparing and contrasting words by their sound. So they're going to look at like word family sorts, like a column of op words like pop and ot like hot, and sort them out accordingly. And as students progress, they'll get into spelling pattern sorts. And spelling pattern sorts would look like vowel digraphs or vowel teams, such as OI says oi in oil, and OY says oi in toy, and the students would sort them according to whether or not they had those spelling patterns. And then meaning sorts are when students are higher level spellers and they get to look into the different parts of speech. They sort words by their meaning. They might sort them by Greek and Latin roots and prefixes. And so that could look like students sorting different kinds of adverbs that end with ly or y and things such as. So there's really a lot of different things that you can do with sorts because there's such a wide variety. And a lot of times people will look at sorts and think that they're just for the younger grades, but they really aren't. They can be made to fit any level of speller. Even adults can do that. And they can be adapted and are very highly interactive and a lot of fun for the students and teachers alike. So when we look at sorts, if you get a basic sort out of one of your word study books, out of your Words Their Way, or your word journeys, let me just show you an example. Or online, you find a sort. Sorry about that. Like this sort here with CH, SH, WH, and TH digraphs. When you get a sort like that, there are many different exercises that you can do. There's many different ways you can implement the word sort in your classroom. But there's a few tips before we get started that I'd like to share with you. So when you use a sort with your students, as long as they are maybe beginning within word pattern or late letter name spellers, you're going to want to make sure that your sort has an oddball category. And that category in your printed sorts you'll find in your books often says oddball on the top, or there's a question mark. Oddball categories are simply categories of words that break the rules. They don't follow the rules of spelling. these are important to include because students need to understand that sometimes these rules are broken, and especially because our language is such a meld of different languages put together, we end up with words that don't always fit these patterns. So students need to understand that there are exceptions. You can call that your exception column too, but my kids really like to call it oddball. They think it's funny. So always try to include an oddball category, and most written sorts that you'll find in books will already have them included. And if you're writing your own sorts, you can think of your own. An example would be if I was doing a short and long vowel sort, let's say for A, and I had cat for one heading and cake for another heading, but then I put the word rain in there. And the AI in rain says A, but it's not following that silent E, CVC silent E pattern, and it's not following the CVC short A pattern. So something that sounds similar you would choose, and I can always talk to you more about that if you ever need help with creating your own sorts. That's always fun to do. Another thing for when you're using your sorts with a class, it's often a lot of fun and very helpful to start with doing the sort as a whole group. So I frequently will take the sorts that I find in my texts and I'll write them out on Post-its or on large pieces of paper, but I find Post-its are the best one. I'll put them in a stack and I'll invite the whole class up to play around with the sorts. This is called an open sort, and group them up on the board as to how they think they should be grouped, as in what makes sense to them. You know, all the long vowels, or all of these ones have an S at the end. They can sort them however they want. There is no right or wrong as long as they can tell you why they sorted them how they did. It's a fun way to start sorts with older students. I've done that with like 12 to 14-year-olds, and they've actually enjoyed it, and they think it's fun to find new ways that I wouldn't think of to sort the words, and it's really great to see how their minds are working when they're sorting that way. Another tip for using sorts in your classrooms, as your students are doing sorts independently, encourage them and kind of get the routine going that as they sort, they say the word they're putting down, then they reread the heading and the words they've already placed in that column. And it helps them to self-check as they read through. They're getting more reading practice. They're becoming more fluent in their reading of these words. And it's just an excellent routine to get into. There's a video on the videos and links page that you can check out that I posted of just a little girl going through and doing that same thing and saying the sort as she goes through. So, basic types of sorts. There are closed sorts and open sorts. A closed sort, simply you are telling the students, this is the rule for the sort. We have long A words and we have long E words, and you have to sort them accordingly. So with a closed sort, you're telling them the categories. With an open sort, you do not tell the students the categories and you let them explore. And that's great for higher level students. The younger students, letter name beginning within word, you're going to want to do a little more closed sorts to give them confidence. But the open sorts are a great exercise if you feel that they're fitting for your students. Once you've done a sort, there's different variations you can do. There's a speed sort. Students always love this. You can time them on a stopwatch or on your phone or the iPad and have them try to beat their own time of how fast they can sort. They also love to try to beat the teacher if you can get them to try to beat your fastest sort. They can also do blind sorts, which are wonderful. So in a blind sort, students work with one another or with the teacher. They get the categories set out on the table, and then each person gets a stack of cards from the sort. One partner will read the cards, say the words cape. The other person who's listening will have to tell the partner where it would go in the sort. So they don't get to look at the word. So the one partner's practicing reading while the other partner is practicing listening and figuring out where to sort that word. And that can go on and back and forth, and that's always fun. A written sort is a great way to even assess students, but also to practice their sorting. A written sort is the same thing. You pick up a card, and this might be done with a teacher or a partner. The partner reads it. Okay, your word's cape. The other person has to write down cape in the correct column on the sort. So they have the categories for that one as well. Now, there are word hunts and all sorts of word games and word study notebooks that we're going to talk about next week to help us really round out our practices for word study. And it's a lot of fun, and there's so many different things you can do. So it doesn't end up being something boring. A lot of people, I feel, think, oh, we have to do a word sort every day. But when you really mix it up, the students enjoy it, and it's fun for everyone. So I talked about routines a little bit. Routines can be as simple or complex as you want them to be. Excuse me. This past year, I modified every year. I modify my word study routine to fit my students. And this year, just because of the love of my students, I had one student who was a high within word pattern reader and was ready to move stages. And I had other students who were beginning within word pattern. So I had two groups. But I had them do the same activities but with their different sorts on the specific days. So I just wanted to kind of tell you how I did that. So on Mondays, I would give the students their sorts depending on their levels. I'd explain the patterns, we'd talk about it, we'd do motions for the different sounds. And then the students would cut the sorts and they would highlight the headings. These students, I felt, really needed that extra support of closed sorts, and it was very helpful for them. So they would highlight the headings, and then they'd make a sorting mat. So we'd get a big piece of construction paper and glue the headings on, and then the students would put their extra cards in the bag. And we would practice them together, and then they could also practice them on their own on Monday. Then on Tuesday, they'd practice their sort with the teacher. On Wednesday, they'd practice their sorts individually or with a partner. And then on Thursdays, we'd play games. We'd do a sort matching game. We also did written sorts on that day. We did word hunts and different things. And then on Friday, the students took that same sort that they cut on Monday and they glued it down independently. And then sometimes they completed a word hunt on top of that, which we'll talk about next week. And that's basically using a text that they've read, that they're familiar with. They need to look through that text and find examples of words that would fit into their sort and record them in their sort. So that's what I have for you for this week. The resources on the links and videos page are awesome for this week, I must say. The routines are really neat to look at. I'm excited to make a new routine for my classroom this year. There's some neat videos showing different types of sorts, and there's more types of sorts than just what we've talked about this week. I'm excited next week to get into word study notebooks, but just thank you for being with me this week, and thank you for all that you do. Happy spelling, and I'll see you next week on Word Study Wednesday. Thank you.